Amelia stood by the stove, stirring the creamy pasta bake she had spent hours preparing. The kitchen in her small Manchester home was filled with the warm scent of melted cheese and fresh herbs. She wanted tonight to be perfect. Thursday dinners had become a family tradition, and though they often drained her energy, Amelia clung to the hope that one day, Sir Edward and Lady Margaret would see her efforts. As the clock struck 6, the heavy knock on the front door signaled the arrival of her in-laws. Oliver, her husband, barely glanced up from his phone. Amelia wiped her hands nervously on her apron and rushed to the door. Sir Edward entered first, his towering figure blocking the fading evening light. Lady Margaret followed closely behind, her sharp eyes scanning the room with quiet disdain. Amelia mustered a smile and welcomed them inside, guiding them towards the dining room where the table was already set with care. Dinner began with small talk. Sir Edward recounted tales of his golfing achievements, while Lady Margaret offered curt nods. Oliver joined in, laughing a little too loudly at his father's jokes. Amelia sat silently, forcing smiles, feeling invisible at her own table. Finally, she served the pasta bake. She waited, heart pounding, as Sir Edward took his first bite. His face twisted almost immediately. "This," he announced loudly, "is a disgusting excuse for dinner." The room fell silent. Amelia's cheeks burned with humiliation. She glanced at Oliver, hoping he would defend her. Instead, he chuckled awkwardly and said, "Maybe next time, darling, order something in." The children, sensing the tension, poked at their food without eating. Amelia swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to stay composed. It was only the beginning of the evening, and she could already feel the weight of judgment crushing her spirit. But tonight, something inside her shifted. A small, unfamiliar ember of defiance began to glow in her chest. She just did not know it yet. After dinner, Amelia retreated to the kitchen, scrubbing dishes with unnecessary force. Her hands moved mechanically, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying Sir Edward's cruel remark. Oliver's indifference stung even more deeply than the insult itself. When the children had been tucked into bed and Oliver settled into the sofa with his football match blaring on the television, Amelia escaped upstairs. She needed air. She needed space. Drawn by impulse, she climbed up to the attic, a part of the house rarely visited. The narrow wooden staircase creaked under her weight as she ascended, carrying a single candle for light. The attic door groaned open. Dust floated like golden mist in the flickering candlelight. Amelia coughed, waving away the heavy air. Boxes and old furniture were stacked chaotically, forgotten relics of the past. She moved deeper into the clutter until something caught her eye, an antique mirror propped against the far wall. It was taller than she was, framed in dark, twisting oak carved with strange symbols she did not recognize. Despite the years of dust, the glass was almost spotless, reflecting her startled face with uncanny clarity. As she reached out to brush the frame, a sudden shiver ran down her spine. The candle's flame flickered wildly, though the attic was perfectly still. And then, faintly, so faintly she almost doubted her ears, Amelia heard it. A whisper. Her name, breathed from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Amelia. The sound was neither cruel nor kind. It simply was. Heart hammering in her chest, Amelia stumbled backwards, knocking over a stack of boxes with a crash. She whirled around, half expecting to see someone standing behind her. But there was only the empty attic, silent once more. The candle steadied. The mirror stood motionless. Amelia backed away slowly, unwilling to turn her back to the thing. When she finally fled downstairs, she locked the attic door behind her, heart still racing. She told herself it had been her imagination. But something inside her, the same ember that had begun to glow at dinner, whispered otherwise. Sleep was a lost cause that night. Amelia tossed and turned, haunted by the whisper she could not explain. Every creak of the house sent her nerves sparking. When dawn finally broke over the horizon, painting the bedroom walls in muted gray, she rose with a heaviness in her chest. Oliver had already left for work, his usual note scrawled on the kitchen counter. She barely glanced at it. Her mind was still trapped in the attic. Determined to prove herself wrong, Amelia climbed the narrow stairs once again. In the harsh morning light, the attic seemed far less threatening, almost pitiful with its forgotten relics and broken memories. She approached the mirror cautiously. It reflected nothing unusual now, only her own pale face, drawn tight with unease. She forced herself to touch the wood of the frame. Cold. Real. Solid. Then she noticed something new. Behind the mirror, a tiny gap in the wall, almost invisible unless the mirror had been slightly moved. Curiosity flared within her. She pushed the mirror aside with effort, revealing a narrow, hidden door carved into the wall itself. Her breath caught. There were no hinges, no obvious handle. Yet there it was, a door, perfectly disguised. With trembling fingers, Amelia pressed against it. Nothing happened at first. But then, with a soft click, it swung inward. Beyond the door was a small, secret room, no bigger than a large closet. Dust hung thick in the air, disturbed for the first time in decades. Inside, a single object rested on a pedestal, an ancient book bound in cracked leather, covered in strange symbols that twisted and writhed under her gaze. Amelia stepped closer, drawn as if by a thread. The book seemed to hum, a low vibration she could feel in her bones. It was waiting. Ignoring every instinct that screamed at her to run, Amelia reached out and placed her hand on the cover. The attic light dimmed. The house seemed to hold its breath. And deep within her mind, a door creaked open, letting something slip through. Something that had been waiting a very long time. The moment Amelia touched the ancient book, a chill coursed through her veins. She staggered back, but her hand clung to the leather cover as if it refused to let go. A whisper rose in the hidden room, a murmur of countless voices, too faint to understand, yet impossible to ignore. Amelia opened the book. The pages were yellowed and brittle, covered in a strange script that shifted when she tried to read it. At the center of the book, however, there was a drawing, a crude map of the very house she now lived in. But something was different. Beneath the house, etched in faint ink, was a labyrinth. A twisting network of tunnels and chambers stretching deep into the earth. Amelia's breath quickened. She had never heard of anything like that beneath Millgrave Manor. No estate records, no inspections mentioned it. As she stared at the map, a symbol near the bottom corner caught her attention. A crude depiction of the mirror upstairs, marked with a blood-red X. A low thud echoed above her, as if something heavy had fallen in the attic. Snapping the book shut, Amelia stumbled back through the hidden door, heart hammering against her ribs. She rushed down the stairs, barely aware of the paintings on the walls that seemed to watch her descent. The house groaned around her, settling, shifting, or perhaps stirring from slumber. In the kitchen, she splashed cold water on her face. The reflection in the sink was her own, but it shimmered strangely, as if something just behind her was moving. Amelia refused to look back. Instead, she grabbed her phone, hands trembling. She needed help. Someone who understood old houses, secret rooms, hidden histories. Her mind raced through possibilities, and one name surfaced: Professor Arthur Langley, a historian who had written a book on the hidden architecture of England's oldest manors. Without hesitation, she dialed his number. It rang. Once. Twice. Then a click. A raspy voice answered. "You found it, didn't you?" Amelia froze. How could he possibly know? Amelia clutched her phone tighter, her heart thudding in her ears. "Who is this?" she demanded, voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. There was a pause on the line. Then the voice spoke again, softer now. "You've awakened something, Miss Hartwell. Things best left buried." Amelia glanced around the empty kitchen, feeling the house pressing in on her from all sides. "I just found an old book," she said, trying to sound casual. "In a hidden room. I thought you might help me understand it." Professor Langley's breath crackled over the speaker. "You must leave the manor," he said, urgency bleeding into his voice. "Tonight if you can. The labyrinth beneath Millgrave was sealed for a reason. The mirror is a gateway." Amelia's mouth went dry. "A gateway to what?" she whispered. Silence answered her. Then the call ended. She stared at her phone, the screen black and lifeless. The house creaked above her, a slow, dragging sound, as if someone were walking in the attic with heavy, uneven steps. Against every instinct screaming inside her, Amelia knew she had to see the mirror again. She lit a candle. The power had flickered earlier and she didn't trust the lights anymore, and made her way slowly up the main staircase. The candle's flame danced wildly, throwing monstrous shadows across the high ceilings. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before her, impossibly long. She was certain it hadn't looked that endless before. Each step forward felt heavier, like the house itself was trying to trap her. When she reached the attic door, it was already ajar. A cold breeze slipped through the crack, carrying the faint scent of earth and old stone. Amelia pushed the door open fully and stepped inside. The mirror stood at the far end, draped again with the heavy cloth. But the fabric moved slightly, as if breathing. The whispering voices returned, swirling around her, urging her to lift the cloth, to look, truly look, at what lay beyond. With shaking hands, Amelia reached out. Amelia's fingers brushed the cloth, and for a heartbeat, she hesitated. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, almost pleading. With a sharp tug, she pulled the fabric free. The mirror stood revealed, its surface shimmering like the surface of a pond disturbed by rain. Amelia leaned closer. Her reflection was there, but it wasn't right. The mirror showed her standing in a different version of the attic. The floorboards were rotten, the walls cracked and blackened. In the reflection, the shadows seemed to pulse and crawl. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Behind her reflection, in the mirror's world, something shifted. A tall, thin figure stepped into view, just beyond the doorway. Amelia spun around. Nothing. The attic was empty. But in the mirror, the figure moved closer, step by agonizing step, its features obscured by a heavy hood. Amelia stumbled back, heart hammering against her ribs. The mirror surface began to ripple outward, as if the figure were pressing against it from the other side, desperate to break through. A low, grinding sound filled the attic, drowning out even the frantic beat of Amelia's heart. Panicked, she grabbed the cloth and tried to throw it back over the mirror, but it slipped from her hands. The figure's hand, pale, long-fingered, emerged through the glass, grasping at the air. Amelia screamed and turned to flee, but the attic door slammed shut on its own, trapping her inside. Candles snuffed out one by one, plunging the room into a choking darkness. In the pitch black, Amelia could hear breathing, slow, rasping, and close. She flattened herself against the far wall, straining to see anything in the dark. Then a voice, almost a whisper against her ear, said, "You've already crossed the threshold." Amelia froze, her body rigid with terror. A faint, cold hand brushed her arm. She yelped and stumbled away, her back hitting the locked door. When she dared open her eyes again, the attic had changed. It was no longer the abandoned, dusty space she had entered. Now, it was a sprawling, endless corridor of mirrors, each one flickering with distorted images. A figure emerged from the gloom, not the hooded one from before, but an old man, draped in a tattered coat, his face lined with sorrow and exhaustion. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Do not run," he said, his voice as thin as smoke. "I am the keeper, the guardian of the threshold." Amelia stood frozen, unsure whether to believe him. The keeper's eyes, pale and almost translucent, met hers. "You are not the first," he whispered. "Many have come seeking answers, and many have been claimed." Claimed by what? Amelia managed to croak, her throat dry and aching. The keeper gestured around them. "The mirror world is alive. It hungers. Each reflection is a door, and some doors should never be opened." Amelia's stomach twisted. "What about the figure? The one I saw?" The keeper's face darkened. "That is a shade. A soul trapped between the worlds. It needs a living vessel to escape, and it has chosen you." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. No, she gasped. There must be a way to stop it. The keeper nodded gravely. There is, but it comes at a terrible price. Before Amelia could ask what he meant, a low rumble shook the corridor. The mirrors trembled and cracked. From the nearest glass, the shade began to seep out, a dark mass of shadow and whispering voices, sliding toward her like smoke across water. The keeper turned to Amelia, voice urgent. Run, child. Find the heart of the mirror before it's too late. Amelia didn't hesitate. She turned and fled down the endless hall of mirrors, the sound of shattering glass and whispering shadows at her heels. Amelia sprinted through the twisting corridor, her breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. The mirrors on either side reflected not her image, but twisted versions of herself, versions that reached out with hollow eyes and twisted mouths, trying to pull her into the glass. She dared not look too closely. She focused ahead, where a faint pulsing light shimmered like a beacon. The shade's whispers grew louder behind her, a chorus of promises and threats that gnawed at her mind. You cannot escape. You belong to us now. Let go. Amelia shook her head violently, forcing herself to keep moving. The corridor seemed endless, bending and shifting like a living thing. Every step she took, the ground beneath her feet threatened to vanish into the void. Finally, she reached a wide, circular chamber. At its center floated a single mirror, framed in gold, its surface rippling like water. This was it, the heart of the mirror. But she was not alone. The shade was there, coiling in the shadows, growing larger, its form almost humanoid now. It smiled, a dreadful, broken smile, and stepped toward her. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. The keeper's words echoed in her mind. There is a way, but it comes at a terrible price. She glanced at the heart. Inside its surface, she saw fleeting images, her home, her friends, her mother's kind smile. And then a flash, an image of herself, trapped, pounding against the glass from the other side. Amelia realized what the price was. To seal the shade, she would have to take its place. The shade lunged, but Amelia darted to the heart. With trembling hands, she touched the surface. It was like plunging her hand into ice-cold water. The mirror pulsed. The shade shrieked, a terrible sound that rattled the very walls. It tried to pull her away, its claws sinking into her arm, but Amelia pushed forward with all her strength, forcing the shade's reflection into the heart. Light erupted from the mirror, blinding and pure. The shade screamed one last time, and was sucked into the mirror, vanishing into its depths. Amelia fell to her knees, gasping, tears streaming down her face. The corridor of mirrors around her began to crumble, the world folding in on itself. She could feel herself being dragged, her own reflection pulling her into the heart. No, she cried out. Suddenly, strong arms pulled her back. The keeper. He grunted with effort, yanking her free from the mirror's grasp. Not you, he said. Not today. The heart of the mirror cracked with a sound like thunder. The golden frame splintered. The mirror shattered into 1,000 shards, each one dissolving into dust. The darkness receded. Silence fell. When Amelia awoke, the world was quiet. She was lying in the middle of the cobblestone path that led into Hollowmere. The sky above was a pale gray, with the first hints of dawn pressing against the horizon. For a moment, she thought it had all been a dream. But as she sat up, she saw the ruins of the old chapel in the distance. The once malevolent presence that had clung to the air was gone. The oppressive weight she had carried in her chest since arriving had lifted. Yet something was wrong. Hollowmere was silent. No birdsong. No rustle of leaves. No sound of life at all. Amelia staggered to her feet, her muscles aching. She limped through the village square, past houses with empty windows like sightless eyes. Where had everyone gone? The last she remembered, the villagers had gathered to confront the darkness. They had stood together against the growing fear. Had they been taken when the heart of the mirror shattered? A movement caught her eye. By the old well, a figure stood, a boy about her age, with unruly hair and a patched coat. He looked familiar. "Hello," Amelia called out, her voice hoarse. The boy turned. It was Samuel, the baker's son she had met briefly when she first arrived. But his eyes, they were vacant, unfocused, as if he were half asleep. He said nothing, only raised a trembling hand to point toward the ruined chapel. Amelia hesitated, fear clawing at her insides. But she forced herself to move forward, following his silent direction. As she approached the chapel, she noticed more villagers emerging from the alleys and houses. Men, women, children, all with the same hollow expression. They formed a silent procession behind her, moving with eerie synchronization. No one spoke. No one smiled. Their footsteps were the only sound, a soft shuffle against the cobblestones. Amelia's heart raced. What had happened to them? What had she unleashed? At the chapel doors, she paused. The great oak doors stood ajar, hanging crookedly from their hinges. Beyond them, the ruins were lit by a strange, bluish light. Shadows moved within, shapes that didn't belong to any living thing. Amelia took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. She stepped inside. Inside the ruins, the bluish light shimmered like mist, swirling around the broken pews and shattered altar. The villagers stood motionless behind Amelia, their eyes wide and glassy. Amelia moved carefully, every step echoing on the cracked stones. In the center of the room, where the heart of the mirror had once been placed, something floated. A shard of the heart, jagged, pulsing faintly with an otherworldly glow. As she drew closer, she saw her own reflection staring back at her. But it wasn't her. The figure in the shard smiled coldly, its movements just slightly out of sync with Amelia's own. It was her, and yet it was not. It was the darkness that had fed on her doubts, her fears, her loneliness. It had survived the shattering. The figure beckoned her forward. Without thinking, Amelia stepped closer, unable to resist the pull. The air grew colder, tighter, as if unseen hands were wrapping around her. The villagers behind her began to hum, a low, eerie sound that vibrated in her bones. The shadows around the edges of the chapel twisted and writhed, forming shapes too terrible to name. "You have come this far," the reflection whispered, its voice both hers and not hers. "All you must do now is surrender." Amelia's heart pounded. She could feel the part of herself that wanted to give in, the part that wanted to stop fighting. It would be so easy. Just let go. But then, through the heavy silence, she remembered her mother's locket around her neck. The tiny silver heart warmed against her skin. It pulsed, alive with a gentle strength. Amelia grasped it tightly. She remembered why she had come to Hollowmere. Not to run from herself, but to find herself again. To remember the light, even in the darkest places. "No," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "I am not yours." The reflection's smile faltered. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface of the shard. The hum of the villagers grew louder, dissonant. Amelia lifted the locket high, and its soft light burst forth, illuminating the chapel with a warm, golden glow. The shadows recoiled, screeching. The villagers shielded their eyes. The shard shrieked as it cracked apart, the dark reflection inside writhing and distorting. With a final shudder, it exploded into 1,000 glittering fragments, swept away by a sudden wind that roared through the ruins. Amelia fell to her knees, gasping for air. When she looked up, the villagers stood blinking in confusion, their eyes clear once more. The oppressive gloom had lifted. The air was fresh and clean, as if Hollowmere had been holding its breath for centuries and could finally exhale. Samuel stepped forward, his face full of wonder. "You did it," he whispered. "You freed us." Amelia smiled, tears streaming down her cheeks. For the first time in a long while, she felt whole. She had faced her fear, and she had won.